Hello, I'm Robert Royal, the editor-in-chief of the Catholic Thing, and I'd like to welcome you to this Catholic Thing podcast, which is the first in a special series of Catholic Thing podcasts that is dedicated to the Synod on Synodality, which opened yesterday. We're recording here in Rome on October 5th. We'd hoped to be with you yesterday, but we had some technical difficulties, which is something I'm sure you can all understand. I'm joined today, of course, by someone who's well known to all of you who are familiar with the Catholic Thing. That's Father Gerald Murray, who's a pastor of a church in the Archdiocese of New York and a canon lawyer, and my longtime sidekick on the papal posse. So, Father.
Thank you, Bob. Good to be with you.
We're going to be doing a series of these. We don't know exactly how much news is going to be emerging from the Synod because there seem to be, this is something I think everyone ought to be aware of, there seem to be some very strict limits on the amount of information that they're going to be releasing, even officially. So we're going to be talking with our contacts inside the rooms and whatnot. But it's probably the case that these podcasts are going to be irregular. They're not going to be daily, I think, the way we've in the past been able to report on press conferences. There's one later today. This will be the first news we really have from inside the room of the Synod. So we may be able to bring you something again tomorrow or soon. But look, let's do some preliminaries because there's a lot of confusion that's out there. A lot of people are very upset. They keep hearing stories in the mainstream media of how the Holy Father is going to change teaching about homosexuality or women priests or all these other things. But before we get to that, because those are issues that we're going to come back to repeatedly, I'd like to ask Father, because he's a canon lawyer, which means that he knows the law of the Church. And I'd like to just ask you, Father Murray, why is it that people are concerned about the form of this particular synod? Because we've had synods in the past. Up until this synod, we've had synods of bishops since very close to the end of Vatican II. Paul VI started a series of synods, in other words, bringing bishops to Rome to help consult with him about specific issues. And even the Vatican itself has said that what we're trying to do is to recover a tradition of synodality that existed in the Eastern Church and for a while was absent in the West. But now, with this particular synod, under Pope Francis, things have changed, and even the form of the Synod is worrying to some people. Explain to us a bit why.
Right. Well, the Synod is essentially a meeting that the Pope convokes of bishops who are with him in the Episcopal College. So they're the hierarchs of the Church, and the bishops who are called to Rome assist him by giving their advice and counsel. And then they, as a group, would vote on some propositions to be sent to the Pope for his consideration. So it's really a hierarchical activity. Now, Pope Francis has extended membership in the Synod to non-bishops. So that includes lay people. It includes religious, men and women religious. It includes diocesan priests. It also includes deacons. So this group of people is now equal in law to the bishops. And that's what the concern is, because it's no longer, therefore, a synod of bishops or a hierarchical synod. It's a synod of bishops and others. And that poses questions about how that fits in with the nature of the Church, because really the lay people are the sheep, the shepherds are the bishops, the priests assist the shepherds, and then the religious assist the bishops also. But now we have this new scheme, so that's what's worrying.
Yeah. So, I mean, the difference, of course, is that there's an apostolic authority that those people who've been ordained, especially bishops, have that comes down to us from the apostles, which is what apostolic, of course, means. There's some other structural things that are worrying people. We're told that there aren't going to be votes, and it doesn't seem that, like in the past, there actually are going to be a series of voted on recommendations that are presented to the Holy Father at the end of the process. Could you explain that a little bit too?
Yes, in the past, the synods would be dedicated to a certain topic. So we had a synod on evangelization, we had a synod on catechesis, the synod on the family under Pope John Paul II. So all of these different synods, the bishops would come together and come up with propositions or different ideas for action. And then they vote on the propositions, and each proposition had to have a 2/3 majority in order to get into the final report. Now, what we're told is the writing committee will come up with a document which will summarize what comes out of the discussions of this synod. And then the vote that will be taken at the end will only be to acknowledge that this document reflects accurately the discussions that were held. So it's more or less the work of a notary or a recording secretary, and then you approve the minutes after a meeting. So they said, it's not, do you agree with what was discussed? Is this what was discussed? That's troubling too, because what's the point of making opinions and considerations about different things if in the end that doesn't really count when it comes to the vote?
Right. And so in other words, people who are already kind of officials of the Synod are reporting on what the Synod participants said to the Synod. So there's this kind of confusion even internally about the reporting. I'd like to turn now, we'll probably in future podcasts be coming back to the structure of the Synod and what that means, but I'd like to turn to some of these hot button issues that I'm sure all of our viewers are interested in discussing. There were a series of dubia, this means questions, that were presented to the Holy Father back at the beginning of his papacy when he had the two synods on marriage and family. Father Murray and I attended those and reported on those in the Catholic thing. But they were never answered. These were 5 cardinals who presented questions because they were concerned, frankly, about the nature of communion and could it be given to people who were divorced and remarried without an annulment. And so that has been left up in the air and was very ambiguous in Amoris Laetitia, which was the encyclical that the Holy Father wrote after those two synods took place. More recently, the cardinals this past summer posed another group of 5, one from each of 5 continents, 5 dubia, 4 or 5 questions to the Holy Father, which went through a process of answering and then not answering. And a lot of people feel that while there hasn't been a clear yes, there is going to be, let's say, for example, a blessing of so-called civil unions for homosexuals. And yes, there has not been a clear answer, yes, that there are going to be the possibility of deaconesses or in the future at some point women priests. There remains this kind of ambiguity hanging over even questions like that. And I'm sure any of you who follow these questions in the press have noticed that the secular press, of course, likes to highlight the fact that the Holy Father is wavering, softening the stance of the Church, softening things that really cannot be softened if we pay attention to Scripture and tradition. So, Father, let me ask you about your own thoughts about those particular issues.
Yes. Well, the dubia that were sent back in June by Cardinal Berg and 4 other cardinals received an answer from the Pope. Neither of those were known at the time. The cardinals who sent the first dubia weren't happy with the answers, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But so they sent a second series of questions. The Pope didn't answer those. So this past Monday, Cardinal Berg and the others published their questions, and then they published their second set of questions. They didn't publish the Pope's answers because they didn't think it was their place to do that. But the Pope published them through Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith. New cardinal there is Fernandez. And the Pope's answers are very troubling in a number of fields. As regards the blessing of homosexual unions, the Pope does encourage bishops and priests to go ahead and develop forms of blessing that will not be confused with marriage, because the Pope centers the question on, of course, marriage is only between a man and a woman. The Church teaches that. But the Pope then says you have to be a good pastor and a good shepherd and take care of people who are in these other unions. Quite frankly, this is revolutionary. If you read a careful reading of it, he's encouraging people to do it, but then he says it shouldn't become a norm. But that's sort of contradictory, because if you encourage people to do it and you don't put any limit on how many can do it, then if all of them do it, then it's a norm. Now, all of them won't do it. But what I don't like about this at all, and in fact, the second set of dubia questions highlighted this, the question here isn't that people are confusing same-sex marriages with the sacrament of marriage. The question is the Holy Father encouraging people to live a sinful lifestyle by saying that God will bless that? And that's the problem.
And of course, as we know, because of the way dynamics are, if it is allowed, if Rome is not opposed to it very clearly, what's going to happen is that activists and others in different parishes, different dioceses are going to make the local bishop or the local pastor look like he's unmerciful and he's actually going against the type of church that the Holy Father is trying to create. So it'll if that continues to happen, it'll be
it'll happen.
It'll basically be everywhere.
The Archbishop, because I wrote about a column on this, the Archbishop of Berlin about a month ago authorized his priest to do this blessing of homosexual couples. The Pope said nothing. Well, now we know why, because this is what he's encouraging.
Well, look, we probably will be coming back to these issues in future weeks, but let's just wrap up with one further set of reflections. We just learned in the past few days here in Rome that Cardinal Zen has sent the former Cardinal Archbishop of Hong Kong, who's been a very strong opponent of a secret agreement that exists between the Holy See and the Chinese Communist government. But he wrote a letter to a variety of cardinals, bishops. We learned in this meeting with Cardinal Burke that Father spoke at the other evening that there are other cardinals who silently are supporting the five who put forth those dubia. But Zen put out a letter to many of the cardinals and bishops who are going to be participants, calling on them to resist what's going to be happening inside the Synod Hall. And the basis basically for his resistance was that he has dealt with these sorts of organizational tactics precisely with the Communist Party in China. And that the way that it seems that the information is being controlled by the people responsible for the Synod. And there seem to be rumors this morning that the participants are going to be required to swear take an oath to perpetual silence about what's going on inside the Synod Hall. So he's raised that worry and encouraged people to actually, in groups, revolt against the nature of the process, refuse to kind of be stage managed by the people who are running the Synod. This is a remarkable development. I don't know that it's ever happened that a living cardinal has asked people to resist the very process and structure of what Rome has set up for a consultation. So that seems to be where we are, and I don't want to make these podcasts too long.
But let me jump in there.
I was going to say, brevity is our charism at the Catholic thing, and I'm going to give Father the last word.
Well, and I'll thank you for that, Bob. But no, I agree. It's absolutely remarkable. Cardinal Zen does say avoid this manipulation, because there's a lot of manipulation here. People are being told when they can speak, how long. They have to be told you have to pray for 3 minutes after everyone speaks. But the more shocking thing, let's say, that's coming out of this, of course, is that, as you say, a cardinal in the church is saying this is not how a synod is going to be run. And a perfect example you just mentioned, I was reading the regulations, which only came out yesterday, about the synod. Synod members are told that they have to have secrecy and keep secret everything that is said, either by themselves or the other synod members during the synod, and then when the synod finishes, afterwards they can't speak about it. In perpetuity. Now, they don't have to take an oath. They're not asked to do that, but they're, by virtue of being in the synod, the lawgiver, the Pope, in this case, he's the one ultimately responsible for them, don't talk about it. Now, this has to be objected to, because the reason why you're not supposed to talk about it during the synod is so everyone can speak freely. But once they've spoken freely, what about the rest of us? The whole point of the synod was the whole church is involved. Well, if we're involved, why can't we know what people say? So I don't think it's going to hold, because, of course, all of the almost 400 people are going to be making interventions. None of them is allowed to say what they said. And then the press summaries come out from the press office. What if the press office leaves out something important and misrepresents your point of view? So more to come, I'm sure.
I like to joke, because I live in Washington, D.C., that in Washington we have leaks, and in Rome you have fire hoses. So even though these people are going to be encouraged not to speak, they will speak, and we will be hearing about that. So we hope to bring you some of that from behind the scenes our next time, and we'll look forward to seeing you then.